So, with the release of its Season 5, Call of Duty Vanguard is now ready for the grave. I'm sure we're all really devastated about that. But with the release of its final season, and of course Modern Warfare 2 being just around the corner now, it felt like a good time to go over the year that Vanguard has had and decide whether it's a good game or one that was a pile of crap. This probably won't be a difficult question to answer. Let's just start with the setting, shall we? Now, Call of Duty Vanguard was always going to be facing a bit of an upward battle when it came to attracting the same level of hype and attention that its predecessors got, simply because World War II is a setting that, well, it's World War II, so it's not exactly very happy time, is it? And it's also been done so much now in terms of video game history. It's 6 years. It's a 6-year period, which in the scheme of things is very little. And more often than not in those 6 years, video games attach themselves to the final 2 of them, which limits the scope for anything different even further. It's just very difficult for them to make a game that feels truly fresh and unique when it's a setting that we've seen countless times now. It comes down to just the aesthetics of the game, the storyline of the game. They're really running out of things to focus on towards the end of World War II, to the point where they've sort of made a campaign now that just isn't particularly realistic. Now, the campaign in some ways had a little bit of potential because the characters were from all over the Allied forces, which is actually a different way of doing it, as far as I'm aware anyway. It's not just your sort of conventional American story where you might get a touch of British Allied Forces action too. There's actually a bit of variety there, and I actually did like that, and I like the idea of these characters all being sort of brought together with different skill sets and different ideologies, and simply the only thing having in common is that it is the enemy that they've got. I feel like there was potential with that, however they did not stick the landing, and overall the campaign was fairly unmemorable, and as I say, it was a tad unrealistic. Now, I'm aware that video games are entertainment, but when it's historical, I feel like you should make a little bit more effort to make it somewhat believable, not... Although, let's be honest, the multiplayer had King Kong and Godzilla in it at some point, so, I haven't really got a leg to stand on that regard, have I? Speaking of the multiplayer, I'm not going to tear this completely to shreds, even though it didn't work for most part. There was, again, similar to the campaign, quite a bit of potential there. For instance, the launch content was really good, especially compared to Cold War with its 8 maps. I mean, Vanguard had 16 core maps, and then plus another 4 for Champions Hill mode. You also had the official term, combat pacing, which meant you had blitz, assault, and tactical games, which were different depending on map size, player count, and game mode. At the time, I actually really appreciated this. I liked the fact they were making an effort to make each game that you would play feel a little bit more different and unique. Even if the maps are the same or the game mode's the same, there might be a bit of difference game on game that you play. Another area where I'd actually compliment the game is that maps. Now, not many of them were amazing, don't get me wrong. Das House was pure quality though, chaotic and just a mess. That's what I like from Call of Duty game personally. However, there were no absolute stinkers. There were no maps that I'm gonna think about until my dying days where I have nightmares about them, such as Stonehaven or even Underpass from Modern Warfare 2. Underpass just really grinds my gears, honestly. The maps actually felt quite fun to play, and I can't really criticise them on the map design as a whole. Again, this is really focusing on base maps. I couldn't tell you which maps were post-launch content and which maps weren't. I stopped playing the game after about 3 months. But the question is, why did I stop playing the game after 6 months? I've just complimented it for ages. When it works, Vanguard's multiplayer was quite fun and had a lot of potential, as I've said before. However, the key issue is within that statement. When it works, it barely worked at all. I'll tell you, I'd never seen the terms latency variation and packet bursts until Vanguard popped up, and now I see them every game I've ever played of it. and it's a term that I'm very much used to at this point. They're basically fancy terms for lagging your ass off. Obviously, when these pop up, you sort of think, oh, I've got connection issues. That's odd, I don't tend to have connection issues, at least in my case. I don't tend to anyway. You get occasional blips, but not constant, out and out, terrible lag. That doesn't tend to happen. Even so, I looked at everything that could be wrong on my end, and I couldn't find any solution to it. So I did a bit of research, and it turns out I wasn't the only one that was suffering. Vanguard had connection issues literally all year round. Vanguard was at best massively infuriating and at worst completely unplayable. It was a large reason as to why I stopped playing it. There were countless frustrating nights when playing the game with friends, especially when crossplay was involved, it seemed. Randomly getting kicked out of parties for no reason, game chat being inconsistent in the sense it would randomly cut someone off for a fairly long amount of time and then they'd just pop back for no reason whatsoever. I remember one night in particular where there was a party of 4 of us, and yet at one point only a maximum of 3 of us could actually hear each other. It seemed to swap game on game. There'd be points where there was 2 of us that could hear another 2 of us, and then the other 2 of us could hear a different 2 of us. It was incredibly confusing, and as much as you can make the best of it at the time and you can have a laugh and then find it funny, it ultimately meant enjoying the game and playing the game was somewhat difficult. Our enjoyment actually came from laughing at the game rather than enjoying the actual game itself, which is, you're not onto a winner if that's the way it's going. Multiplayer being broken sadly meant yet again missed potential. There was certainly a basis there and a foundation for a good multiplayer that would be playable almost year round. However, once again, they striked out and they missed their swing. Now, I've actually made a video about Vanguard Zombies to a degree, but it was a few months ago now, and I feel like where we now have everything that mode brought to us, it's a fair point to reflect and see whether, one, they made any sort of improvements, improved the situation at all really, and 2, whether the situation got rescued. To answer those in short fashion, question 1, yes, it did improve. Question 2, no, God no, did it rescue it? No. Now, I do fully accept that Treyarch, or the development team for Vanguard Zombies, probably a small team in the scheme of things, were really stretched for this, and my overriding opinion is that Treyarch should have never been roped into this, ever. Sledgehammer should have either taken it on themselves, as they did with Advanced Warfare in World War II, or done something else for a third mode, or, you know what, even sacrificed the third mode to make sure multiplayer actually fucking worked. That would have been a good idea, wouldn't it? However, if we're going to judge the Zombies mode for what we got, and considering it was marketed as a proper Zombies mode, we have to really judge it as such. And in that sense, it was just so bad. It followed on from Outbreak, really, in terms of the objective-based gameplay that Treyarch were really trying to double down on for whatever reason. Both the launch map, Da Ang Fang, and then also Terra Maledicta, which was the map from Season 2, were both objective-based maps, and they were just so boring. The locations that you were put into were all multiplayer or campaign locations, just slightly altered, basically recycled, which that is a practice that I really dislike with Zombies, and it was happening in Cold War a little bit, but it happens in Vanguard as well, and it's something I really hope they stop doing in a few years' time when they come back. But it wasn't just the locations, it was the objectives that you had to do. So you'd be at your base, the main sort of base was in Stalingrad for Da Ang Fang, for example, and you'd port all around to certain locations to complete the objectives, and these objectives would be what you do over and over again. Pack-a-Punch was right there for you from the off, so were all the perks. No camos for the Pack-a-Punch, which just seems ridiculous. The new perk system that they brought in for Vanguard just seemed a bit weird. It seemed a bit pointless. I mean, it makes you have to spend so much money to get the tier 4 version of the perk, whereas obviously in Cold War you'd be able to unlock it. You'd be able to essentially spend to unlock it, and that was fine. That was a perfect way of doing it. Making you buy it in game each time, it just takes so long to do, and you basically don't bother in the end because you just don't want to. No Easter egg on Da Ang Fang at launch, which was utterly ridiculous for the Treyarch Zombies mode when you think about how in-depth their stories have been in the past and how intricate the previous Easter egg hunts have been. The fact there wasn't one just seems bizarre. I'm not even an Easter egg hunter type of player with zombies. I literally just want to go to as high round as possible. Even I was somewhat disappointed the fact there wasn't an Easter egg there. It was just all round lackluster and almost felt like a placeholder. It just had nothing. It just had nothing to it. And after Terra Maledicta in Season 2, they'd begun to have a U-turn on the objective-based gameplay. Obviously, having a U-turn halfway through a game's development or game's cycle is not ideal, and so that meant a remake was probably the best way to go. So we got a reimagine of Shi No Numa. Shi No Numa was briefly seen on Daranfang as one of the locations that you go to, so it made sense to do Shi No Numa. And it was actually really fun to play. It was brilliant. It's the most fun I've had playing zombies for a long time, and it was the most fun I had playing Vanguard, period. It may have been a remaster, it may have been the 4th time we've seen a map over the decade or so that it's been around. But it was just so fun, and it made me think whether the mode would have just been so much better had they just gone with that from the start. Obviously, the final map that you're seeing in the background is just Terra Maledicta, just round-based. It's called the Archon for some reason. Now it's got a new name. That's nice, I suppose. As I said, placeholder map, and they sort of basically admitted to this, saying that they just didn't really have the time to focus on anything, and they've got to move on, really. And in fairness, I would rather they concentrated on their next game and making zombies as good as it had been in the Black Ops 2, Black Ops 3 era. Because, yeah, this just was not it. Not it whatsoever. In terms of the Archon, as it's been called now, it was too big, and you could tell it was not built for round-based zombies. It was obviously built for the objective-based mode, and it was just quite boring. I ended up exfilling after round 20 because I just couldn't be bothered with it anymore. As I say though, and I just do want to stress this, I do accept that the people making it were stretched to their limit. In hindsight, and granted Captain Hindsight turning up isn't always helpful, it probably would have been better to go along the lines of what they did with Shi No Numa for the whole game. Make some remakes, make it clear they're a small team and they're stretched. Just refine the maps we previously had before, add new areas maybe, and use World at War maps as Shi No Numa was, and just remake those for the year. I'm sure most people would have been happy with that. Thankfully, they've now got a good few years before Zombies comes back, and they've got time to perfect something and hopefully bring it back to how good it was. So to conclude, Vanguard had an iffy campaign that was unrealistic, a bit far-fetched and not overly memorable. A multiplayer mode that was completely broken and flawed throughout the year, and a zombies mode that was pretty much a waste of time. A word I used throughout this video was potential. I mentioned it way too many times. However, I do stand by that. Vanguard did have a lot of potential. There are areas of the game where foundations were set for it to be very good. Sadly, it just never really materialised into anything solid, and Vanguard will not be remembered fondly. And let's face it, most of us will probably forget about it after about 5 months. We can now all move on and look forward to Modern Warfare 2 coming out in October, and of course the beta coming out later this month. And hopefully it will fare a lot better than Call of Duty Vanguard did. And that won't be difficult, let's face it.